Welcome to the AlmighTees channel. I've got a question for you. Are you properly curing your t-shirt ink? In this week's episode, I'm going to share with you the secret to accurately curing screen printing ink. So stick around. We're going to talk about that next. Before we start, let me preface by saying that I'm speaking specifically about Plastisol screen printing ink. Let me also preface by saying that I by no means am a chemist. All I do is have about 35 years in the screen printing industry, and by just personal actual experience is what I'm basing today's video upon. So let me start by saying Plastisol has two main components, and that is PVC resins and plasticizers. Now with those two components, they have to be brought to a certain temperature for those two main components to fuse and thus become wash fast or not to be scraped, peeled, or cracked. So if those two main components need a certain temperature for Plastisol ink to not wash out, what is that temperature? Well, standard Plastisol ink cures at anywhere from between 320 to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in recent years, there has been an emergence of a low cure ink that has been brought into the screen printing industry. Low cure ink, thus being low cure, has a lower cure temperature. That being anywhere from between, I've seen them as low as 240 degrees all the way up to about 280 degrees, and this is Fahrenheit. A lot of these low cure inks also, they have some different variations of them, what are called flex cure, meaning that they can cure at the lowest temperature around 260 and still could be brought up to around 325 degrees, especially if you're using those low cure inks in conjunction with regular standard 320 to 325 degree inks. Now always make sure that you're checking with each manufacturer's and each ink line's technical specifications for that exact cure temperature. This secret that I speak about in the earlier part of this video is not really a secret at all. It's how you use it that makes it the secret. And that is what is called the donut probe. Now this is a donut probe, and I don't know if you can see it, but there are little wires that are stretched across the actual nylon part of the probe itself, and then you have a digital thermometer. And it's got a very long wire. I don't know if you can see it. It's all tangled up. I wasn't really prepared like I should have been. And basically, what you would use this and how it's used from the manufacturer's standpoint is to put the wires face down and push them down into the ink film, the wet ink film itself, and then run that garment and probe through the dryer. And that is why you have all this excess wires. So different dryers are going to have different lengths. They're going to have different dryer chambers, so you have to have long enough a wire from between the thermometer to your probe so that you can not let your digital thermometer go through your dryer and melt it. I hope that makes sense. Now the process that I'm talking about is that I have actually used this or tried to use it in the way that the manufacturer's instructions told you how to use it, which is to use the wires face down, push them and embed them into the wet ink, and then run the garment through the dryer. Unfortunately, I never had much success with that, so I never really used this much. How I found a way to use this is quite the contrary, is not to use it with the wires face down, but with the wires face up, and place the probe inside your shirt before it goes through the drying chamber or through the oven, and place it directly under your ink film, and that will measure the temperature underneath your ink film. Because let me also say, and it's something that I didn't state earlier in the video, is the technical specifications for most Plastisol screen printing ink is that it needs to reach that temperature through the entire ink film. I know a lot of people like to use temperature guns, and that's a good way to measure your ink film. But the one thing you have to be very careful with that is that you are only measuring the surface temperature of your Plastisol ink film. That doesn't tell you, is that temperature being reached through the entire ink film? And sometimes that's where beginner screen printers end up having a problem, is that the surface reaches that required ink temperature, but all the way through the entire ink film, it has not reached that required temperature. And that is why some of the times screen printers have washout issues with their shirts and with their clients. So at the end of the day, how did I figure this out? I would love to take credit for it, but it really wasn't me. I had somebody that was a neighboring screen printer down the road from me that I became friends with, and he was a production manager at a large contract screen printing company in Wilmington, North Carolina. And he said that they printed for a major t-shirt brand, and that periodically quality control would come in and, check for colors, check for placement, check all the little things that, that they were so, it was a part of their job in quality control. And he said that that's what they would do. And this was a major clothing manufacturer. As they would come in, they'd put the probe, as you see here, with the wires facing up, and they would measure and see how hot the ink film was getting underneath. Now, theoretically, if the heat is transferring through the ink film and reaching the wires of that probe where the actual temperature is measured, if that temperature underneath inside the shirt has reached that minimum temperature for ink cure temp, well then I've always kind of thought that's a good way of looking at it and a good way of doing it. And you know what, to be honest with you, we haven't really had any problems with washout with our shirts since I started doing this. If you do decide to try this method, I want to give you a tip, and that is to make sure that the shirt that you measure that temperature in and with, after it comes out the exit side of your dryer and you remove the probe out of it, you need to make sure you're running that shirt through again. Because since I've started doing that, I've noticed a couple of customers that came around. This was a former family member that I printed for. There was a spot in the back of her ink that was the exact size and shape of this white nylon ring. And I realized that for whatever reason, maybe the temperature was reflecting off of it and it wasn't getting that cure temperature in that portion of the donut probe. So make sure you're running your shirt, your test shirts, back through your dryer. So once you're using this method, if you choose to do so, you're going to have to make some adjustments either to your dryer temperature or your belt speed to get that ink film in the sweet spot so that you know that your ink film is curing. The one thing that we like to do is it can be kind of a hassle using this probe. So because what you always want to make sure you're doing is never pull the probe back through to the entrance side of your dryer. You'll damage the wires, and you'll have to buy a new set of wires. And I'll be honest with you, they're not cheap. You can keep the connecting wire, that you can keep that, but you will need to replace these little wires in the donut probe are replaceable, and they're not cheap because it's a specialty item. But what we do is make sure that, like I said, make sure you're pulling the probe after it comes out, pull it out of the inside of the shirt, and pull the wire through the exit. Don't pull the probe to the entrance part of your dryer. The other thing that we like to do is that once we have reached that temperature where we feel that our dryer is to temp, that our ink is curing, is that then when we run another shirt down and we're sure that the inside of the shirt is getting to that minimum cure temperature, then we will use the temp gun. And then that kind of gives us a little bit easier of a way that, so if we know that the temperature inside the shirt is reaching that minimum temperature, then we just use this and measure the temperature of the ink film as it's coming out of the dryer. But also make sure that when you're doing this, you got to get in there at a specific angle so that you're measuring it while the ink film is still under your heat panel. A lot of times if you wait for it to come all the way out, the temperature is going to drop so fast that you're not going to get a more accurate temperature. Now, if we're using 275 degree ink cure temperature, I find that in our shop that measuring the surface temperature, I feel that at 320 to 320 degrees Fahrenheit is a good temperature, and I'm usually pretty confident that we're in a spot where the ink is completely cured, it's completely fused, and we're not going to have any washout issues. We hope you found this video helpful and informative. Would you give it a like and even consider subscribing to the channel? And if you do, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be alerted whenever we upload new content. And if you have any suggestions or tips for curing your own screen printing ink, drop those in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.